for the one who finds the Millennium Falcon.
What's up, MetaNerds? This video will cover the homeworld, biology, culture, history, and behind-the-scenes facts of the Gand species. These are by far one of the most unique beings in the galaxy, having a robust biology that points to an alien interference in their evolution, force-guided mystical shaman sheriffs, and using both luck and their hive leaders to survive the galaxy at large. But first I want to thank this video's sponsor, Magic Spoon. I love this stuff and I'll be adding my own review to the 20,000 plus 5-star reviews over on their site. I actually first heard about Magic Spoon from another YouTuber, More Plates More Dates. He takes his physical fitness very seriously, but he lives in Canada, so he used to have to drive into the US just to pick this stuff up. Great news for the Canadian and UK MetaNerds out there, Magic Spoon now ships out to your countries as well. Of course with the 100% happiness guarantee, a full refund, no questions asked. And with the link below or code MetaNerds, you can get $5 off your purchase. So why all the hoopla over some cereal? Because cereal's awesome for breakfast, and if you're in the dry cereal gang like me, you can snack on this stuff all day long. Best part is, it's one of the healthiest snacks you can find, and I promise you it tastes incredible. With 0 grams of sugar, 14 grams of protein, and only 4 net grams of carbs in each serving, coming out to 140 calories. Here's a comparison to other major brands from when we were kids. And speaking of which, if you do have kids, this is a no-brainer. Cereal is easy and fun, but for now it can actually be healthy. The magic is in a naturally occurring sugar alternative, allowing for the same texture while still being keto-friendly, gluten-free, grain-free, soy-free, and low-carb. This stuff gives you the fun breakfast and snacks of your childhood while still being a responsible, healthy adult. After one spoonful, you'll believe in magic again. Check them out with the link below, magicspoon.com/metanerds, or use the promo code MetaNerds at checkout for $5 off. But with that, let me get back to snacking and editing this video. The homeworld of this species share their name, Gand, being located in the Outer Rim territories at grid coordinates T8, falling within the slice and bordering with wild space, with neighbors like Mon Calamari, Seleucami, and Kessel. The world was covered in thick gases, mostly ammonia, producing a Type 4 atmosphere that was unbreathable to almost any other species. There is very little greenage, and some shallow pools of liquid, though it's unclear if this is water, and most of the world was covered in mountains and rocky terrain. It is unknown what other flora and fauna evolved on this world, but we can assume that the beasts that they ate were either incredibly deadly, evasive, scarce, or all three, as we will see later how their whole culture revolves around being excellent trackers and hunters. This world selected for only the hardiest of species, and these insectoids had a thick, chitinous exoskeleton, which acted as a natural body armor, much harder than even the bones of some other species. This was thickest near what would be our clavicle, and even having an extra strip to protect the neck and shoulders. And on top of this, they had the ability to regrow any limb within just a few days. There were numerous accounts by bounty hunters and civilians attesting to times that Zuckuss had jumped out of a 3rd-story window, survived explosions, and even some close-range blaster bolts, all without seeming to be dazed or even slowed down. Their hard skeleton also helped them on offense, as their muscles are incredibly powerful, and worked in concert with their limbs and pointed fingers, each with these segmented parts, combining to be so strong that they could even punch through stormtrooper armor. Despite the jokes on how dispensable Stormies were, and it is true that their armor was weaker than the clone armor, this is still a high-tech material that was able to absorb all sorts of damage. But with their bare hands, a Gand would smash through this stuff like a Gaddafi stick. The sides of their heads possessed some ear holes, and it seemed to be of average acuity, while their silverish, large, compound eyes worked like many insects and Rhodians, being a sort of collection of tiny individual eyes, and which gave them the ability to see into the ultraviolet spectrum. Perfect for hunting at night, and even sometimes necessary during the day, since sunlight on their homeworld was always faint, struggling to get through the thick layers of gases. But at night they could not perceive any colors, just this sort of monochrome night vision. Over these complex eyes is another set of armor, a clear keratin substance similar to our fingernails, that protected them from all sorts of debris. So no eyelids, eyelashes, nictitating membranes, or liquid to divert and direct dust. Instead, this simple fixed covering would be bombarded by the intense sandstorms that ravaged Gand. And it's likely that older Gand would gradually lose their eyesight, if not to degeneration of the eye itself, then through the collection of scratches in this sort of protective screen covering. And perhaps they later found technologies to buff this out and allow them to see clearly again. Recent genetic studies reveal that the Gand are distant genetic relatives of the Keldor and Tognath, all known for their respirator masks to adapt to the Type 1 oxygen-rich atmospheres, which were preferred by most species. But how this could be true is a mystery. The Tognath homeworld of Yar Togna is not found on the galactic map, but Doran is way over in J8. Perhaps there was some ancient and forgotten space-traveling common ancestor that spread across the stars so long ago that these species then further evolved into these three forms. Or we're seeing something like the Celestials and Rakata's creation of various humanoids. I often stress that many of these near-human races are all related, artificially created from a shared genetic profile. We need to consider the possibility that ancient alien forces like the Celestials were also involved in experimentation with these less human-like beings. We can see a nice spectrum here because the Tognath are classified as insect mammalian, so far the only known species with this classification, and could be seen as a sort of missing link between the more mammalian Keldor and purely insect Gand. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. And this may explain some of the next details. Bugs on Earth do not have lungs, they breathe through openings on their bodies called spiracles. Like these three related species, even within the Gand we can see them on a spectrum. More bug than others, but the Gand themselves are split into lungless and breather varieties. It is difficult to see how this could occur without some intervention from a greater being, be it the Force or alien, but this baffled the best biologists in the galaxy. These lungs were very efficient as well. A single breath would oxygenate, or rather ammonianate their blood to 85%. This was a problem on other worlds because they could kill themselves with a single breath if they absorbed oxygen at this rate. Their tissues reacting like it came into contact with acid, being incredibly painful and requiring an immediate lung transplant, though very few ever survived long enough to go through this procedure. Sometimes a flaw in the respirator would slowly damage the lungs, and those who dwelled in oxygen environments knew that they ran a risk of respiratory failures and disease that resulted from long-time exposure of even small amounts of oxygen, leading to chest pains, shortness of breath, and coughing up blood. Their only way to get around some of these issues if you were exposed to deadly oxygen, the breather Gands could hold their breath and enter a comatose state, where all of their body functions seemed to stop. Many confuse them for being dead, but this was a desperate last-ditch attempt to avoid the oxygen poisoning, giving them several hours where hopefully someone would come to rescue them. One of the best uses of this ever documented was when Zuckuss was able to evade Boba Fett by using compressed ammonia canisters to take long breaths off of every time he came out of this comatose state, allowing him to extend this seemingly lifeless state for days, only showing detectable signs of life for a few seconds over this period. The breathers had all this to contend with, while the lungless ones were completely immune to all these gases, and went even further to not require ammonia either. They did not respire at all. Instead, they got all of their metabolic sustenance from breaking down their food. This is only seen on Earth in a single organism, a parasitic blob called the Henigoya salmonicola. Researchers believe that this was once a larger organism, related to jellyfish, that, quote, have lost their tissue, their nerve cells, their muscles, everything. And it's still unknown exactly how they get their energy, though the best theory so far is that it can absorb ATP directly from the fish that they attach to. So something like this seems to be happening in the stomachs of these lungless Gand. Funny enough, many of these Gand would still wear masks just to fit in with their brothers off-world, the mask being so ubiquitous that it took on cultural meanings beyond its functional purpose. Further oddness is also seen in their speech. Their native language is called Gand, and to alien species it just sounded like a string of unbroken, chaotic drones and clicks that would put the Geonosians to shame. When they did try to speak Galactic Basic, the lungless ones found that they could drive the sounds via their gas bladder muscles, making the sound emit not through their mouths but emanating from all of the holes in their exoskeleton. This is very difficult and still sounded odd, so many would make use of vocoders as well. While the breathers had a closer organ structure to be able to speak Galactic Basic, like we see with Zuckuss and many others. There are even more differences in their appearance. The two sexes, male and female, could have exoskeletons that range in color from brown, green, and purple, while eye color could be silver, black, yellow, or blue. The shape of their head would also vary greatly, having this more rounded head and this elongated one. And then the sections of their head also differed in shape and texture. They even differed on their fingers. Some had 3, while others had 5. The average height of females was 1.5 meters or 5 feet, compared to 1.8 meters or 6 feet, which is right around humans, while their lifespan is a bit less, at 61 years, while there were accounts of many that reached into their 90s. Perhaps saving the best for last, this biological point transitions into their culture as well, as their entire species revolves around the Findsmen. The Findsmen were force sensitive, and being from such a hostile world, their religion saw the Force guiding them on their hunts. Everyone had a supernatural connection. They would become bounty hunters and explorers that had an absolute conviction that the Force had set them on their path. The same way the Jedi can focus on someone or something to find it in the galaxy, tapping into the force that connects us all. The name Findsmen came from the fact that they could locate animals, proper shelter or materials, and later on find those with bounties on them, all through this deep connection with the Force. The signs of Force connection were obvious from birth, and after the child was instructed. Eventually, as an adult, they would undergo a ceremony called the Janwini Jaka. This was only after they had performed many Force miracles for their tribe. And after a long and, as described by General Aaron Kraken, who saw one in person, a very disturbing ritual was performed, they were officially Findsmen, allowing them to reproduce with whomever they wished, and could now refer to themselves in the first person. Non-mystics went through a similar experience, as all of their species were simply called Gand, until they did some major achievement in their own field. That would give them the ability to use a family name, but if they wanted to use a first name, they had to pass their own Janwini Jaka, bringing together all the elders of the Gand. They would be sent to a Rutsavi, a group of other Gand that were so unique and important to society that they could use first names, who would hear of this one's exploits. Using a first name if you hadn't passed the ceremony was outrageous, and seen as a mix of insanity and arrogance, eliciting an anger in the Gand like if some Catholic declared themselves a saint while dismissing the church leaders. Let's hear a Gand explain it in his own words. The Findsmen would also partake in rituals like bathing in chemicals, and later engaging in genetic manipulation, perhaps a mythologically retained memory of what ancient aliens did to their species long ago. These rituals would produce new growths on their exoskeleton, like knobs and serrated blades that could be used as added armor and weapons. They also developed their own martial arts to get through the thick chitin of the enemy Gand, with names like Piercing Touch and Striking Mist. And since they trained against each other, this meant they were able to slice right through the more fleshy aliens, and like mentioned, punch through most synthetic armors. Interestingly, it was not equivalent to a sin or blasphemy to use their force powers for personal gain, often employed as bodyguards, bounty hunters, or assassins. The only thing a Findsman was forbidden from doing was to leave their mystical order. If one abandoned their tribe, other Findsmen would drop everything to hunt them down and execute them, as these shaman sheriffs were crucial to keeping order in their communities, settling disputes with their supernatural authority, and tracking down Gands that threatened their tribe, often using techniques of sleep deprivation on top of their already minimal sleep requirements, or using complex rituals to divinate the location of an enemy by a 3-hour trance where they studied the movements of the mists that cloak their homeworld. And once on the hunt, they were able to do something they called storing sleep, where they could essentially just run up a sleep debt, not getting any rest until their mission was done, and then sleeping for whatever time was equivalent to what they missed. It does need to be pointed out that the Gand themselves do not think they are using the Force like a Jedi or Sith. They claim it is some other metaphysical source entirely, but all who study what they do, including other Force sensitives, are certain that this is what everyone else just calls the Force. I would say that we shouldn't exclude the possibility of them being guided by some non-physical entity like the Wills, some sort of equivalent of angels or demons who interacted with beings through the Force, and thus from the Gand's point of view this nuance is that they are not using the Force, but interacting with some Force being, or maybe even that the alien species that crafted them is in communication with them, since all Findsmen were telepathic, and could speak directly into the minds of all alien species that they came in contact with. As for their history, first contact wasn't until 3951 BBY, dodging several galaxy-spanning conflicts with their remote location at the border of wild space far from any major hyperlanes. Even throughout the Clone Wars, only a few individuals ever got involved, but never an official stance or involvement from the planetary government, which at this time was a meritocratic democracy, replacing the long-standing totalitarian monarchy, which ruled over numerous pocket colonies, each with nests of immediate family members. Though again, this was a term put on the Gand, with later researchers revising this thinking and believing that it was a mistake that arose from their insect biology, as the Gand themselves have no word for king or queen, and there's nothing like a royal family, so perhaps still a dictator but not royalty, and there are no recorded political disagreements, a unique sort of government that evolved out of their hive mind. One thing almost all species had in common is that they quickly adopted the advanced tech of their alien visitors. They couldn't manufacture much on world, and most would work with Biblos drive yards to produce their starships, though many would capture ships and heavily modify them to pump ammonia instead of oxygen. The preferred weapon grew to be the Gand Discharger, modified by them and eventually even produced by them, something that was much like an electro staff, and could be set to varying intensities to stun or kill targets. Perfect for these blaster-resistant, armored psychic bounty hunters that want to capture some targets alive. While Gands back home would often use these devices to herd their flocks and hunt. Another thing they picked up from the galaxy at large was the slave trade, and now Findsmen were using their abilities to track down runaways. But when the Empire took over, they used their high tech to monitor and track everyone, making a lot of these Findsmen jobs obsolete, and their cultural takeover forced many of these mystics to flee off-world, though it is unknown if Palpatine ever took an interest in their connection to what most would have called the Force. Because of the threat of the common Type 1 atmospheres, the Gand that traveled off-world would often live in space stations. Here they would pick up on ideas of democracy and individual rights, self-identity, and the meaning of life, all ideas that leaders on Gand were violently opposed to, resulting in Gand shutting down almost all alien visitors to this world. Luckily for the rulers, nobody really saw this poisonous, gas-blanketed desert world as a fun vacation spot. Some, quote, beings of standing, or Hinween, were off-worlders that were highly respected and considered of such renown that they were invited to this world, though still confined to the alien quarters of the spaceports. In 7 ABY, members of Rogue Squadron were among these welcome guests, though they were informed that if they told anyone of their time on Gand, this would be taken as a profound insult, most likely insinuating that Findsmen would come to punish them for this transgression. Though this warning doesn't seem to have scared General Kraken, because it's from him that we get the details of the Findsmen ritual. And the last thing we hear about them is that their world was able to completely avoid all violence during the Yuzon Vong War. Again, their remoteness and being off the beaten hyperspace lane saved the Gand from one of the most devastating wars in galactic history. So that's it for the breakdown, but you definitely want to hear these cool facts and behind the scenes stuff. Their most famous member was Zuckuss, who was a Findsman and Force-sensitive, something other bounty hunters like Forlom noticed, hence his nickname, the Uncanny One. Oral Krieg was a famous hero of Rogue Squadron. He was not a Findsman, but earned his first and last names by excellence in astronavigation and piloting. They have so little interaction with the galaxy at large that they have no listed imports, and their exports are only Findsmen. In 3951 BBY, an entire Gand nest relocated to Nar Shaddaa to aid their Findsmen in hunting down a Jedi. Most species were shocked to see such a scary-looking species was actually humble and gentle in their speech, even the bounty hunters. Modesty and humility were such virtues that even great Findsmen would often still refer to themselves as this Gand, a voluntary omission of their great title, and just a nod to the fact that they saw themselves as still just playing a role in the Great Gand Hive. This species was first introduced with Zuckuss in Empire Strikes Back in 1980, where his eyes were made from bubble wrap, and these cylinders are filled with colored water, the actor blowing bubbles through them. The Gand name was given in 1989 with Galaxy Guide 3, and they have been expanded upon in the game The Old Republic, and in novels like Rogue Squadron and Tales of the Bounty Hunters, with a lot of the details in this video coming from the Essential Guide to Alien Species, the Atlas, and Guide to Warfare. If you made it this far, the best way to help me out is to hit that like button, leave a comment, and share it with somebody who might like it. Subscribe if you want to see more, and be sure to check out the links in the description, where you can find discount links on amazing metal print art and free audiobooks from Audible. You'll also find our Patreon and PayPal. Shout out to all our patrons, especially our $25 tier, Matthew Beltrami, Bill Payne, Brandon Robinson, and Jace Peck. But most important of all, remember, there are many roads you can take in the life of crime, but they all lead you into the crosshairs of a psychic sheriff bug. And the Force will be with you, always.